All right. Um, it is the top of the hour, so we will go ahead and get started. I am JC Bander, and I'm on the Learning and Development team here at GitLab, and I'll be the facilitator for the session today. This is our second live learning session. The first one was earlier today, and it will be on communicating effectively and responsibly through text. Like I said, this is our second session, kind of first group of doing this type of session. So please keep that in mind as we go through. And that said, we will have a survey for you to complete at the end of the session and give us feedback on what you liked, what you think we can improve on, and even ideas for future sessions. We will be going through the slides that are linked in the agenda doc. So you can access them there. I'll also be sharing my screen so you can see them on your screen as well. So I will start off by introducing who all will be helping out today. So Darren is our subject matter expert, and he will be helping me present the content to you today. And then on this second call, Sunghae will be on to help answer any questions that you all might have. Darren, Sunghae, and myself will help answer those questions at the end of this call. And then, yeah, Rose was on the call earlier today. And then what you can expect from this session. So we'll cover effective and responsible communication, what the communication guidelines here at GitLab are, and then what to do if you have a concern. And then how we communicate in text at GitLab. As you all know, we try to work as asynchronously as possible. So that means there's a lot of text communication that happens, and that can happen in a variety of different avenues. So Slack, merge requests, issues, email, Google Docs, anywhere that text is happening in communication form or where someone may see the text. So that's what we're referring to today in our session. And then we do have effective and responsible communication guidelines in our handbook. They are on the communication page. That link to that directly to that page is here at the bottom, but this is just a screenshot of what is on that page or what was on that page last night. So hopefully it didn't get updated between now and then. But you can take a look at that. I'm not going to read through all these for you, but if you have questions on them, please let us know. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Darren.
Awesome. Hi all, thanks JC. I'm Darren, head of remote here at GitLab. Thanks so much for joining this session. I've spent my entire career working remotely, building teams, hiring teams, mentoring teams, training teams, and editors, all remotely. So a lot of communicating over Slack and nonverbal, non-video, and there are definitely some differences in communicating like this long-term compared to co-located companies. So we just wanted to give you an overview of how we see that at GitLab and hopefully provide some tips and some time for Q&A. So this first slide, the goal of Lowcontext is to be considerate of the people or audience that you're speaking to. So there are some bullets here that you can dive into, but at a high level, it's really asking you to be considerate in every mode of communication that goes out. So it's important to recognize that what you write may be read in the future. So although you're writing it for right now, it's important to consider that somebody might come into the conversation months down the road, well after the initial thread began, and they might not have all of that initial context that you had when you wrote the initial communication. So it's important to be as specific and as detailed and as precise as possible to give that context down the road. And that's especially important in a company like GitLab, where we have new people joining all the time, and they are able to go back in GitLab issues and merge requests and in the handbook and see what the context was around why a certain decision was made or why a certain feature was added or removed. If you don't have that context there, they're lost from the very beginning. So it's important to consider people that come after you and what they'll, the context that they'll have when they read it. The key here is to assume that your readers don't know anything. And so if you come at it from that perspective, it gives you the impetus to put as much context around what you're saying as possible. It's easy to imply your experiences with text communication, but you need to remember that not everyone has similar life experiences to relate to, hence the need to be precise. And by being specific, you're forcing yourself to think through what you're saying. And in general, there is value in taking the time to be deliberate in communication. That's It just gives you some time to simmer on what you're about to say, put context around it. In general, that's a better way to go about communicating on text. And I just want to close this slide by saying this isn't suggesting that communication should be cold or soulless. In fact, in the GitLab Thanks channel, we encourage team members to be as specific as possible about what they're thanking someone for, such that you don't even need to be a part of the team or have that prior context to understand and recognize how a certain value was being lived out. Next slide. So we're looking here at why text communication is important for successful remote working. When you're an all remote company spread across 60+ countries, a lot of what you say and do will be through text. We believe in asynchronous, and that's why we lean so heavily on text-based communication. This allows the greatest amount of people to be able to contribute regardless of what time zone they're in. And it also is a forcing function that's important to our success, which is documentation. So if you get in the habit of documenting questions and solutions, our culture and our knowledge base grows stronger day after day. And if you take shortcuts and don't document over time and at scale, you start losing a lot of that knowledge. So the spoken word is difficult to capture and record, and it's even more difficult to filter through, whereas text communication can be assembled for a precise train of thought, which leads to fewer misinterpretations. Or at the very least, you'll have that to go back to and then ask for specific clarification when something is written down. So obviously text communication is not perfect, but it does lead to more documentation, which leads to less knowledge loss over time, which is a definite competitive advantage for us compared to a company that doesn't document as much and has to reinvent the wheel time after time. Working through discoverability is an issue that we're currently undergoing, and I think that we're going to be doing this for a long time. When you have 3,000 handbook pages, sometimes it's difficult to find what you're looking for. We recently did stand up a handbook page on tips for searching through it. But at the end of the day, it's better to have more knowledge than not, but rest assured, that is something that's on our mind. Next slide, JC. So some examples on why and how text communication can be different and difficult. So the key here is to remember that words have impact long after they're written. So I like to say the internet is forever. And even with internal communications amongst a team, how you converse with one another, it's important to think about this as if it were viewed through an external lens. So if you had a journalist sitting in the room amongst the conversation within the team, what would that journalist think or say? That's a good frame of mind to put yourself in when you're going through your day-to-day team meetings. It's also important to consider your audience when you're speaking, and as best you can, consider who is on the receiving end of your text communication and what state of mind they might be in when they receive it. I like to recommend reading the room, which is to say, be aware of the current state of affairs and strive to communicate in a way that will diffuse versus further fuel any conflict or fire that may be going on. And lastly, it's not always about right or wrong. It can be about communicating in a way that will get you to a truce if you're in a time of conflict. And ideally, you want to communicate in a way that opens the door for true listening amongst both sides. So less speaking at someone and less speaking in a way that will invite conversation versus assuming the answer is already there. And all of these challenges tend to become less significant over time once you've built a rapport with a person or a team. And I'll say early on, you may need to lean on Zoom calls more often to clarify text communications and get a better understanding of a person's unique qualities in their text communications. Next slide. So a quick reminder here that this is on all of us. We're all moderators. If you see something, be sure to say something respectfully. Reach out to your direct manager, your people business partner. We have various Slack channels where concerns can be raised. We strive to provide a culture where everyone can raise their hand and say something if they see something. And it's all on us to maintain the healthy and safe environment. Next slide. So a word on feedback, always a fun one. So assuming positive intent is actually a sub-value within the GitLab values. And I think that applies particularly here when receiving feedback. So feedback is a gift. It might not always feel like a gift, but it actually is. It helps you understand other cultures, other points of views, things that you may not have considered. It's important to assume positive intent. We're all on the same team. We're all trying to make each other better. And feedback is a mechanism to become more understanding and more compassionate over time. So we not only work with a global team, but we communicate externally to a global audience. And when you assume positive intent, even if it feels like an attack, it puts you in a better position to ask for clarification versus reacting. The goal here is to create a two-way street of communication so that all parties are heard and work is put in by all sides to ensure that all points are understood. Again, not always the easiest thing, but assuming positive intent puts you in a better state of mind to go at it that way. It's also important to think through your responses to feedback. So you can't necessarily choose how you are spoken to, but you can choose how you respond. And collectively, if we all consider that, it makes for a healthier communication environment. Next slide. So this is a cartoon here that it's kind of funny, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but there's a lot of truth to it. The illustration basically shows that it's your responsibility to own how something impacted someone, regardless of how you intended it. So this person is essentially saying, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I intended it to be different. It's on you to interpret it differently. And the other person is saying, no, it came out of your mouth. This is how it impacted me. I want you to listen to what I'm saying so you can understand why I was impacted in this way. So if you speak it, it's your job to own it. And we need to create an environment where we're free to ask for clarification and work through those things versus just letting them linger and assuming that something was ill-willed. And with that, I think it's back to JC.
Yeah, thanks, Darren, for going through that content. So we will go to the agenda now for any questions that people have. So we'll start off with Rob.
Yeah, thanks to all of you for creating this. I think this is actually a really, really important thing for GitLab as a company. I think that the fact that we rely so much on asynchronous communication, particularly for people who are in this particular time zone. I'm in Sydney, Australia, so from a geographical perspective, I tend to spend most of my time reading notes rather than actually physically communicating with people. I wanted to make mine's really just a suggestion rather than a question. Is this something that we can publish and put in our onboarding issue? I think this is something that really should be a week one activity for everybody who comes on board at GitLab to look at and review.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that we can do. Since this is our first one, I am going to work on putting together like a past live learnings page with links to the recordings and slide decks and things like that. But I definitely think it's something we can add to the onboarding issue. Great suggestion.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Over to Thong.
Trying to find the unmute button. Yeah, so my first question is in the context of that link over there, which is on slide. I'm trying to find the slide 9. So I'm just trying to figure out who a business partner is and what do they do, because I'm unfamiliar with that concept or role.
I can help answer that question.
Thank you.
Is that okay? Yeah.
Yep.
Hi, Thong. This is Sung-Hae. How are you?
Well, I'm well, thanks, Sung-Hae. Thanks. How are you?
So the people business partners are aligned to each part of the business. So you're part of engineering, and Rose, who is based in the Netherlands, is your people business partner, and they are your single point of contact for all things in the people group, otherwise known as HR.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's good to know. Thanks.
Yeah, and you have the next question as well, I believe.
Yep. So this is in the context of kind of constructive criticism, or there's room for improvement. And let's say someone wants to give feedback. How would like, is there any good examples on how to start asynchronously via textual communication? Because we can't always jump in straight to kind of verbal communication.
Yep, no, that's true. One of our sub values is actually negative is one-on-one. So if you're having to say something that you would perceive as negative or you think will be interpreted as negative, even if you can't hop on a call synchronously to deliver it one-on-one, I would recommend starting one-on-one, whether it's Slack or email or something like that. I generally would recommend trying to frame it, go back to low context and provide as much context around that as you possibly can. There's no great silver bullet, like easy way to deliver that feedback. A lot of it comes to putting it in the context, talking about what was done well. Try not to focus on just the thing that was done poorly, because over time this can really wear somebody down. And I would say this isn't directly how to address a constructive criticism, but make sure as a manager that you're doing whatever you can along the way to provide positive feedback when people do things well. Because what can often happen is if you just do your job well, no one says anything. And then you only hear something when it's constructive or negative. But it's a pretty easy thing for a manager to just put a recurring reminder to look at things that are done well. Because if a person hears of 10 things they do well and then one thing that they didn't do well, they're a lot more likely to be receptive to that feedback because they have so many past positive things to build on. So a lot of that just comes down to being mindful of what's going well and making sure you take time to celebrate and praise whatever things, whenever things are going well. It just buys you a lot more grace when you need to offer constructive feedback.
Awesome. Thanks, Darren.
Perfect. Over to Patrick. Oh, go ahead.
Just on that, one of the things that I've always found really valuable with feedback is that if you're receiving it, don't debate it. The very first thing that you do is you just acknowledge it and accept it. And sometimes actually, particularly with receiving feedback, one of the best things that you can do is say, I acknowledge and I accept it and I'm going to think about it, and then actually schedule a follow-up at a different time to have the conversation about the feedback, so that you don't turn the feedback into a debate or a conversation at the time when, sometimes the feedback itself can be somewhat confronting.
That's a great point. Really appreciate that. We'll make sure we document that as well. Love that.
Definitely. Yeah. Perfect. Awesome. Oh, Jamie, you added a comment in as well about like fierce conversations, and that is something that we're looking at, working with like the sales enablement team as well. It's something that some of them have used. So have you done it in the past?
I have. It was so great. I've done a few different types of things like that. Direct, like conflict can sometimes be difficult for me, and I'm sure it is for other people. So it would be a great thing to offer.
Definitely. Thank you for that suggestion. Okay, Patrick, over to you.
Yeah, so put maybe a little differently than I worded it here. Do we have a recommendation for individual contributors who maybe feel they're seeing a pattern or a part of the business that is not following our best practices here, to sort of raise that in a safe environment, feel comfortable bringing that up and contributing to a solution?
You want me to take that one?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Okay, so I think there are a few different avenues. The first thing, and I realize that not everyone is comfortable or feeling safe, the leadership team does want to encourage everyone to give direct feedback. So if you feel comfortable, you should be able to call out the leader in a one-on-one, give the feedback. That we have a policy against retaliation, and we take that very seriously. So that's one. If you're not comfortable doing that, then you can also talk to your people business partner. Okay, great. And then my follow-up question, similar to William's idea from the previous session of sharing examples, it'd be really great to have some role-playing opportunities where we start with, here's a common scenario that I'm seeing in my section of the business or in my role, and then get people a chance to practice with each other and give fair feedback and coach people so that we get in the habit of doing things the right way. I don't want to hoard the dialogue, but that's something that JC and I are working on, is that we have sessions where it's like this, more informational to set kind of a foundation. And then we have what are called the action learning sessions, where people can come and practice in a live situation. And that's for people who want the practice.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Awesome. Thanks for the suggestion. And over to Tom Q. Oh, cannot verbalize. Okay. In the event where you think you could have written something better, is there a recommended mitigation strategy? Edits, follow-up, comments, Zoom call?
Yep, so I can take that one. One of our sub-values is say sorry. It's pretty simple. People have different comfortability levels with how they say sorry and in what form they say sorry. But generally speaking, sorry is universal. I would recommend keeping it short. I mean, sorry suffices, and contrition is a thing that I think most people value and appreciate. It takes a stronger person to say sorry than it does to just debate it for another hour. So whatever medium you feel is best, I think a quick Slack would go a long way, and it kind of breaks down any walls that you may have accidentally built up, and you can go from there.
And Charlie, you're adding in a follow-up question. Do you want to verbalize that?
So I'm just thinking, if you're having this exchange on GitLab on an issue, for example, and so when folks reply to an issue, a notification is sent out. I may be in engineering, but I don't know the answer to this question. How many minutes does it take for that notification to be maybe not sent out, but compiled? So with whatever text is in that. Does that make sense? Because that says if you can edit something, how likely will that be that edit will, like if you immediately edit it, will that edit make it into the notifications seen by other people?
So as far as I'm aware right now, if you edit a comment within a GitLab issue, it doesn't resend a notification, not by default anyway.
I'm kind of glad about that, given how noisy that would get.
Yeah, so I think if there's a situation where there's something that you feel really significantly about, where an edit might not do it justice, I see no harm whatsoever in replying to yourself within the issue thread and just say, you know, actually, I meant this. That way people guaranteed get another notification.
Fantastic, thank you.
And then Flory, it's not a question, but do you want to verbalize? Is it Flory?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just going back to the end of the presentation about the comic, because it's something that I've historically struggled with. I find that very difficult, the intention and the way you communicate, and something that really helped me. Can't remember where I read it, I wish. It's we judge ourselves by our intentions, but people judge us by our actions. And I feel like it helps on both sides to understand that whether it's we receive something or we communicate, like for me, completely flipped my way of saying things and like kind of foster positivity. I find it very difficult because like we think about our intention when we communicate, but if we think more about the way the person is going to receive it, it completely changed the way we say things. If that can help anyone else the way it helped me, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think another way that people can kind of ease into that is if you feel like maybe what you're saying or what you're intending really isn't being received in the same way, you can simply say the things that you would normally say and then follow it up immediately with a question on, do you need clarification on that? Or is that clear? Or how is this received? I hope that we are fostering an environment where people would be open and honest with each other so that we can help each other be more clear if they feel like that's a struggle for them.
Perfect. And then over to Sharky.
Hi, yes, I just wondered if we had a mechanism to kind of raise your hand if, you know, coming to GitLab and learning GitLab's way of working is a massive paradigm shift when you've come from the likes of, say, a Salesforce or SAP environment where none of these things are fostered for the most part, and culture is really toxic in some of those environments. So, you know, do we have a mechanism to raise your hand or kind of say, hey, I'm having some challenges in getting this way of working really embedded in my day to day, so that you avoid some of those pitfalls that you're talking about.
I'm not aware that we have anything
sorry.
today. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm not
no
aware that we
worries.
have anything really in place today, but I think that's a really great point, because I agree. Like, I went from working 100% in office to 100% remotely, and it was definitely an adjustment. So I think that's something that we can work on as a company.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, Sung Hae's mention of active learning follow-up sessions. I feel like this could be a great one to get people who have come from co-located spaces, or to your point, have just felt like they've been in careers where it's a toxic communication style, and even if you don't like it, it just has become your norm, and so it's very different and difficult to think about it differently. In the here and now, I would recommend everybody join the remote channel. We have a Slack channel, #remote. And people in there are generally long-term experienced remote workers. And I know definitely for myself and the people that I know in that channel, consider us all buddies. Think about it as an onboarding buddy. Consider us all remote buddies. And if you have any question like that, or something feels a little different, or you're not sure how to acclimate to doing this remotely, just reach out in that channel. There's no judgment there. We want to help people be as optimized as they can in the remote environment and don't feel stuck. I think a big risk is coming from a co-located space into this remote environment and then just trying to do everything the same. And a lot of people don't give themselves permission to drop all of the prior toxic baggage at the door, even as it relates to communication. So just giving yourself a clean slate and really starting fresh is liberating, but also daunting. So I understand that. So for now, start there, reach out in the remote channel, and then hopefully we can design some more active learning lessons as a follow-up.
Yeah, and I would add to that that I think oftentimes we don't know what our problem is, or what our question is, or how to phrase it. And so I think a safe way to go about that in the remote channel is just to say, hey, does somebody have time for a coffee chat to help me with working at GitLab, or to help me with remote? And then you can just sort of have a safe time to just explore what you're feeling or your hunches are, to even be able to ask the right questions.
Absolutely. And I think for conversations like that people are comfortable with, this could learn to documented lessons as we build out the all remote pages and our communication page in the handbook. Any lessons that come from these, if we document some of the results, even if you leave the personal details out, that can help everybody henceforth not have those same challenges, or at least see how people dealt with them.
Perfect. And I know there are 2 more questions, but we are over time. And so if you do have questions in the doc, we will get you the answers to them. But we are over time, so we'll go ahead and end the call. But we really appreciate you all for attending. And please do take the feedback, or complete the feedback form. It should take you less than 5 minutes. But like I said, we will address these questions here that we didn't get to today. And thank you again for attending. Have a great rest of your day.